student at the Islamic College in London, and is now head of research at Islamic Centre in Maidenville. He's going to be talking to us today about the weight of Zayd Ibn Thabit's collection of the Quran. Yeah?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please, Shaykh Mohammed,
for
30-40 minutes and then some time for
okay. Thank you for the exaggerated introduction of myself. So now let me find where are we now at the moment. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. The topic, as you know, is about the collection of Zayd Ibn Thabit, and it is a sort of basic understanding that the first person who collected the Quran after the Prophet was his young companion Zayd Ibn Thabit. Now, this, of course, would be based on two suppositions. First, that the Quran was not compiled at the time of the Prophet, and secondly, that no other companion did have a drive to compile the Quran for himself, and it was just an official undertaking which was done by Zayd Ibn Thabit. Now, what I want to say here is that this is an absolute misunderstanding of history, and Zayd Ibn Thabit has been wrongly inflated in both his status and his undertaking and what he did, and also in his knowledge. And so I would embark by mentioning the hadith from the Bukhari that states the way the Quran was compiled after the Prophet through Zayd ibn Thabit. And then I have a few criticism of the hadith and a few input to the whole issue. Okay, first let's go to the hadith narrated by Bukhari. Zayd ibn Thabit narrated, this is in Bukhari, Abu Bakr sent for me owing to the large number of casualties in the Battle of Yamama. While Omar was sitting with him, Battle of Yamama, of course, took place after the Prophet by Ahlul Ridda, and large number of casualties refers to the casualties of those who were the Huffaz of the Quran, who had memorized the Quran, and due to that he summoned Zayd ibn Thabit while Omar was sitting with him. Abu Bakr said, Omar has come to me and said a great number of Huffaz, memorizers of the Quran, were killed in the Battle of Yamama, and I'm afraid that heavier casualties among them may occur on other battlefields, whereby much of the Quran may be lost. So the hadith presumes that the Quran was only in the heart of people and not collected and compiled anywhere. I said, maybe lost, therefore I consider it advisable that you should have the Quran collected. That's Omar said to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr is quoting this to Zayd. I said, and this is Zayd saying, how dare I do something which God's apostle did not do? Omar said, by God, it's something beneficial. Omar kept on pressing me, Abu Bakr, until God opened my chest for that, for which he had opened the chest of Omar, and I had the same opinion as he had in that matter, meaning that compiling the Quran is actually a bid'ah, something which Prophet of God did not do, and actually Abu Bakr did not dare to do this until Omar had pressed on him, insisting that this is a good thing to do, and his chest was opened for that, and now he conveyed that to Zayd ibn Thabit. Abu Bakr then said to me, Zayd says, you are a wise young man, and we do not have any suspicion about you. And you used to write the divine revelation for God's apostle. So you should search for the fragmentary scripts of the Quran and collect it in one book. Zayd added, by God, if Abu Bakr had ordered me to shift a mountain among the mountains from one place to another, it would not have been heavier for me than this ordering me to collect the Quran. Then I said, how can you do something which God's apostle did not do? Abu Bakr said, by God, it is something beneficial. Zayd added, so he, that's Abu Bakr, kept on pressing me until God opened my chest for that, for which he had opened the chest of Abu Bakr and Umar. So just insistence of friends opened the chest of Zayd to embark on compiling the Quran. And I had in that matter the same opinion as theirs. And then he says, so I started compiling the Quran by collecting it from the leafless stalks of the date palm tree, and from pieces of leather and hide, and from flat stones, and from the hearts of men. And interestingly, I found the last verses of At-Tawbah with Abu Khuzaymah al-Ansari, and with no one else. And I added to it the rest of the chapter. The scrolls of the Quran remained with Abu Bakr till God took him unto him. Then it remained with Umar till God took him unto him. Then with Hafsa, the daughter of Umar. Okay. This is the hadith. Now, as I said, there are several assumptions made in the hadith. The Quran was not compiled at the time of the Prophet. It was a bid'ah to compile it. Prophet never had advised that. And it was not entrusted to anyone but to Zayd Ibn Thabit, because Abu Bakr and Umar had no suspicion about him. And lastly, no one actually used that Quran. It was just kept with Abu Bakr, and then was entrusted to Umar, and then to Hafsa. And actually, no one has ever seen that copy before Uthman wanted to unify the copies of the Quran. So there are certain criticism of the hadith, and somehow the idea that this was the only compilation of the Quran after the Prophet. Now, the hadith is open to criticism on a number of grounds. First, it assumes that up to the time of the Prophet's demise, there had been no authoritative record of the Quran. This is shown by many traditions and by invincible evidence to be wrong. Secondly, in the list of those who fell in the Battle of Yamama, which was the main cause for compiling the Quran, very few are regarded to have known the Quran by heart. Surely could find names of only 2 of such persons. Those killed were mostly converts. And how would have converts be the memorizers of the Quran to create a concern for the caliph when they were, of course, martyred in the battle? Besides, according to the tradition itself, much of whole of the Quran was already written in some form, so what was the worry? Thirdly, and above all, why an official collection of this kind was not circulated and did not find any authority at all? We'll discuss later on. There were many copies of the Quran spread out throughout the Muslim world. None of them were copies of this compilation. They were from other companions. So why such an undertaking with such a, of course, a flamboyant sort of air, and mentioning later on that it was only Zayd ibn Thabit who had collected the Quran? And fourthly, why Uthman decided to make a new recension if this official copy was available? We know that Uthman wanted to unify the copies of the Quran because they were spread all through and people had copied it not accurately, and people were reading it in different variations. So he wanted to make one standard authoritative copy. So why didn't he use this copy? It was available. Why did he bring about the companions for about 2 years, another undertaking to make a new compilation of the Quran? So that means the copy was not authoritative and was not accepted by the companions. And fifth, if it was an official compilation, what it was not kept by the caliph and was passed on to Hafsa, who was just a wife of the Prophet. And an authoritative official copy should be kept in the stores of the caliphate, caliph library or store or somewhere, rather than in the house of Hafsa. And if Zayd had already compiled a codex, why he was again put in charge by Uthman to compile it anew? These are the questions about the hadith. You know, the hadith is somehow takes for granted, and actually mostly majority of the Muslims take for granted that this is true. Zayd ibn Thabit was the only person who compiled the Quran after the Prophet, and this was the copy who was circulating. But the evidence shows us that it's wrong. Now, my contentions are appointing Zayd to collect the Quran was an absolutely wrong decision by the caliph, which was based only on political factors. There were many other companions who were much more knowledgeable than Zayd for the job, than Zayd ibn Thabit. I'll talk about Zayd ibn Thabit shortly, and why Abu Bakr and Umar decided to entrust Zayd to do the job rather than, say, for example, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud or Ubay ibn Ka'b or others who were actually the teachers of all in Quran, and of course they had their own compilations. For this reason, for the reason that it was a wrong decision to put Zayd ibn Thabit in charge, for this reason his collection remained a private collection was not used by anyone. And the same mistake of choosing Zayd was repeated at the time of Uthman, which didn't last long, because at that time there was a collective sort of effort to make an accurate copy of the Quran, and the companions did not accept the authority of Zayd, and Uthman was forced to remove Zayd and put Ubay ibn Ka'b in charge of the compilation, which we'll probably, if we have time, we'll talk about it later. Now, and the companions did not allow Uthman to make the same mistake of putting Zayd in charge as Abu Bakr had put Zayd in charge. Now, these are the things. Now, who is Zayd ibn Thabit? Very briefly, Zayd ibn Thabit was one of the Ansar, and he was 6 years old when his father was killed in the Battle of Bu'ath, the battle between Aus and Khazraj. And he was 11 years old when Prophet migrated to Medina. And in the Battle of Badr, he was 13, so he was not allowed to fight. And therefore, when Prophet, peace be on him, passed away, he was 20 or 21 years old. And when the Quran compilation was entrusted to him by Abu Bakr, he was only 23 years old. And this is very strange, because it is just if, for example, you go to a university, there are lots of scholars there, and you choose a student to do a very important project, research project for you. This is very strange. Why Ubay ibn Ka'b was not chosen? Why Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was not chosen? Why Abu Musa Ash'ari was not chosen? Why others who were very much knowledgeable in the Quran, they were not chosen? And a young man of 23 years old, who was a student actually of these people, was chosen to do the job. Now, of course, Zayd was a very intelligent person. He learned writing as a deal between the captives of Badr and the Prophet. You know, in Battle of Badr, the Prophet, peace be on him, made a deal with the captives that if they teach 10 young men of Medina reading and writing, they would be free. And Zayd was one of them. So actually, Zayd learned to write only after the Battle of Badr. And had he been a scribe of the Quran during the lifetime of the Prophet, he couldn't have written more than the last 7-8 years of revelation. So he was not aware. This is what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud actually said to Osman, that you are putting someone in charge, that he was in loin of his father when I was writing the Quran, and you are putting this man in charge. Why you do that? So the question was really justified, that the companions did not defer to the authority of Zayd ibn Thabit because of his young age. Now, Sheikh Tusi has reported most of his views in different fields of fiqh. So later on, he became a jurist, and he reports many traditions from the Prophet in the field of fiqh, and especially in the field of inheritance. However, according to Kulaini, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq says that the verdict of Zayd ibn Thabit in inheritance is hukmul jahiliyyah, is the verdict of jahiliyyah. And actually the Shias have written books. Najashi mentions that Sa'd ibn Abdullah al-Ash'ari wrote Ihtijaj al-Shia ala Zayd ibn Thabit fil fara'id. Actually, the arguments of Shia against Zayd ibn Thabit in inheritance, because he believed in ta'asib, which of course the Shia do not believe in it, and of course his opinion became the official opinion of the country, and all judges had to defer to his ruling on ta'asib, and therefore ta'asib became one of the main rulings of inheritance. Ta'asib means that when the inheritance is more than the shares, it doesn't go back to the female heirs, it goes back to the second category of male heirs, which of course is something very technical. I don't want to talk about that now. Anyhow, scribing the revelation, again, in many traditions we have that he was not actually an official scribe of the Prophet. He used to be someone whenever Ubay ibn Ka'b was not there. And Ubay ibn Ka'b was used to be someone whenever Ali ibn Abi Talib was not there. And Uthman was not there. Then Ubay ibn Ka'b came to write. And then, of course, Zayd ibn Thabit. It is, as I said, his status has been inflated very much, especially during the time of Banu Umayyah, because he was very much a supporter of Uthman, and therefore Banu Umayyah very much tried to give a very high air to the status of Zayd ibn Thabit, and therefore they used to say that he wrote the letters of the Prophet in Syriac, in Hebrew, in Aramaic language, in Persian language, and he knew all these languages. He had learned it just in that period of 8 years that the Prophet was in Medina, and he had learned to write, which is very strange. Strange because we cannot find name of Zayd ibn Thabit under any letter written by the Prophet, while we find the name of many other scribes written. As the Prophet wrote a letter, at the end it was written katabahu, for example, Ubay ibn Ka'b wrote it. Now let's look at this claim that he used to write to the kings for the Prophet. As I said, for example, we find the name of Ubay ibn Ka'b on the many letters and pacts of the Prophet. His letter to Junada, his letter to Khalid ibn Zamad, his letter to Al-Azdi, his letter to Harith, Wali Abi Sufyan, and many others we find at the end, Katabahu Ubay ibn Ka'b, or other scribes. But under no letter of the Prophet we find any signature of Zayd ibn Thabit. And saying that all the letters of Prophet was written by Zayd ibn Thabit, again, is something which is a sort of exaggeration of his status by Banu Umayyah, and of course by the supporters of Uthman before them. Learning a language in 17 days, as he said, that Prophet asked me to learn Hebrew because he wanted to trust people when he the scribes when he used to write letters to the to the Jews is again another very strange thing, because first of all, in 17 days, how much a language you can learn to write a letter, an official letter to say, for example, official people in the Jewish community, while we know there were Jewish converts beside the Prophet. Why should Zayd ibn Thabit do that while, for example, Abdullah ibn Salam, a Jewish convert, is there, or other Jewish converts are there? This is again very strange. Now, why I'm mentioning all this is because they actually put the whole authenticity of that compilation under question, that who was the person who compiled this first copy, which was actually a private copy for Abu Bakr and for Omar. Now, why Abu Bakr mentions that we have no suspicion about you? What was the suspicion about Ubay ibn Ka'ab? You know, as he was summoned, as we read in the Hadith, when he was summoned to be entrusted with the job of compiling the Quran, Abu Bakr said, you are an intelligent man and we have no suspicion against you. What was the suspicion against Ubay ibn Ka'ab? You know, if you go to the books of sciences of the Quran and history of the Quran, look, for example, in Al-Itqan of Suyuti or Al-Burhan of Zarkashi, you would see they said there were 4 companions who were experts in the Quran. Of course, other companions knew about the Quran, but they were not experts in the Quran. It's very, of course, simplistic to think that anyone who met the Prophet or was with the Prophet for a couple of days or a couple of months, they had a knowledge of the Quran. No, they had a couple of verses here and there or a couple of chapters there or memorized a couple of chapters, but they had to, when they made mistakes, they had to refer to the experts. And there were 4 people who are actually mentioned in all these books of sciences of the Quran, that they were real experts of the Quran. And one was Ubay ibn Ka'ab, the other was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and then Abdullah ibn Abbas, and then Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, we don't want to discuss about Ali ibn Abi Talib at all, because we know, of course, the divide was so huge that no mention of Ali ibn Abi Talib is even mentioned in the older books. Later on, of course, like Suyuti and others have brought this in their books, but they didn't want to mention anything about Ali ibn Abi Talib. However, when we come to people like Ubay ibn Ka'ab and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who are the experts, Zayd is actually mentioned among those who knew some part of the Quran, not the whole Quran. He was not real experts in the Quran. So why Ubay ibn Ka'ab? What was the suspicion against Ubay ibn Ka'ab, and what was the suspicion against Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? Well, the suspicion was that they did not support in Thaqifah the rule of Abu Bakr. And they, as experts, they had that very high status which people looked up to them. And it was very dangerous that these people would have expressed their views about the situation. And it shows that, of course, these experts were not reliable in the opinion of the caliph to do such a thing, or more plausibly, they wouldn't have accepted to do it because they had their own compilations already. They had compiled the Quran for themselves. Why should they compile another Quran as an official copy for the caliph? So why there was no suspicion? Because admittedly, Zayd did have an attribute which none of the other companions had, which Al-Bukhari has alluded to, and that was that there was no charge against him. And he had clear record which suited the government's aim at the time and which was apparent on the day of Saqifah when he took a sharp stance in defense of the immigrants, Muhajirun, even though he was one of the Ansar. And we have many, of course, different scattered traditions here and there, accounts about him, كان زيد من مبغض علي. He was one of the enemies of Ali. وكان ممن تخلف عن بيعة أمير المؤمنين. And after Ali became a caliph, he did not do bay'ah with him because he was a very close ally of Uthman. ولم يشهد مع علي حروبه. He never took part in any of the battles that Ali had to wage against his enemies. وكان يحرض الناس على سب علي. And he was actually encouraging people to swear at Ali. وكان من الأربعة الذين نصروا عثمان. You know, when Uthman was seized by the companions, all the companions unanimously came against Uthman and wanted to remove him. Only 4 of the companions were supporting him, and Zayd was one of them. And then he was put in charge of the judiciary at the time of Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman. And always whenever Umar wanted to leave Medina, he was the person in charge after him. And whenever Uthman wanted to get out of Medina, the same thing. And out of that, he had actually gathered a huge wealth. And it is mentioned that بلغ ثراء زيد أن خلف من الذهب والفضة ما كان يكسر بالفؤوس. So much gold and silver he left that was just possible to break them with eggs. غير ما خلف من الأموال والضياء, apart from the real estates that he left behind. Anyhow, if I want to go into that political aspect, it will go very long. On the other hand, Ubay ibn Ka'b, which was the head of all the companions in compilation of the Hadith, he was right from the beginning with Ali ibn Abi Talib. From the 12 people who followed Ali after the Bay'ah of Abu Bakr, he had actually witnessed Badr and Aqaba and many other occasions, and was the one who was entrusted by the merits of all the surahs by the Prophet. If you go to any book of tafsir, you see that the merits of every surah is mentioned by Ubay ibn Ka'b. This is what the Prophet, peace be on him, taught him. Now, let's look at the value of the compilation. It's interesting that there was no immediate rush by Muslims to avail themselves of this official codex, and it passed to the care of Umar and then his daughter Hafsa, as we mentioned. And moreover, this was not considered as an official copy from which other copies should have been produced. It is interesting that at the time of Uthman, it was just taken as a copy among many other copies from which the official codex was produced. It is recorded that by the year 20 after Hijrah, 4 codices were in use in 4 corners of the empire. This is before the unification of the codices by Uthman. It was the Mus'haf of Ubay ibn Ka'b. It means that Ubay, if not at the time of the Prophet, he compiled the Quran after the Prophet. If we just concede that he did not do it at the time of the Prophet, he did compile it after the Prophet, and that copy was actually widespread in Damascus. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's copy was used in Kufa, Abu Musa Ash'ari's in Basra, and Miqdad ibn Amr in Homs. There was no place for Zayd's codex anywhere in the Muslim territory. And only after the unification was under process, they just took this compilation from Hafsa's house to compare the copies. In addition to these codices, several others were also available throughout Muslim lands, but no mention is ever made of Zayd's copy. Now, the big question is why the codex compiled by Zayd was of no use for Muslims while compilation of other companions were widely used. Well, it was very clear. Zayd was not an authority. And probably there were many mistakes in his compilation because he was a 23-year-old boy and a student of the whole field. How could he done such a huge undertaking on his own without seeking help from Ubay ibn Ka'b or Abdullah ibn Mas'ud or any other companion who were well-versed in, and why he did not seek help at all, and he did it himself? And these are all things which come to mind about the way he compiled the Quran. And Now, let me just mention what Blusher says about the compilation of Zayd, and just finish it there. Why did Abu Bakr? Now, Blusher, of course, was an Orientalist and scholar of the Quran. He says, why did Abu Bakr choose someone like Zayd, a young man who was no older than 20, for this important task when there were senior companions qualified for it? Let us assume the turmoil of the situation presented an obstacle to turn into an important personage such as Ali ibn Abi Talib. Naturally, of course, they wouldn't have turned to Ali ibn Abi Talib for that. And even when he compiled his own copy after the Prophet, they rejected it. They said, we don't want it. So, and actually, my suspicion is one of the drives for compiling an official copy, beside the copies of other companions, was actually the suggestion of Ali ibn Abi Talib that take my compilation. Now, anyhow, but why did they ignore the rest of the good companions who had a longer history of dealings with the revelation of the Quran and companionship of the Messenger? Did the Battle of Yamama kill off all the reciters out of the original companions, and was there no one except Zayd who was new to reciting the Quran? New because, of course, other companions were with the Prophet, like, for example, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud from the beginning of Bi'athah. And Ubay ibn Ka'b from the beginning of Hijrah, while, of course, Zayd was a newcomer in that field. And this is something which stirs doubt in the matter. We can hardly believe that it was Zayd who compiled the Quran. Add to that the fact that history does not record exactly when he began and completed this task. If it is true that he undertook compiling the Quran after the Battle of Yamama, there would only have been 15 months of Abu Bakr's life left. This is too little time to complete this important task, which required great efforts to collect together all the sources and meet with the men who had verses and chapters and were spread throughout the lands, all of which would require more time and many assistants to make it impossible to complete it in this short period of time. Moreover, the narration says that Zayd put the Quran together on pages, and despite them with Abu Bakr, on pages and deposited them with Abu Bakr. Then they passed to Umar, and then his daughter Hafsa inherited them. If the purpose behind putting the Quran together was to take care of public interest, it should have been given to Muslims to copy and write from. Why it was just kept in that sort of private storage? Now, just one word about the standardization of the codex. Says at the time of Uthman actually, you know, Huzayfah ibn al-Yaman came from the Battle of Azerbaijan, seeing that people were reciting the Quran in different ways because the copies were somehow messy. They were not accurately copied from each other. Converts had copied them. So he asked Uthman for a unified copy of the Quran. Now, Uthman again resorted to Zayd, because Zayd was very close to Uthman, and Zayd was actually the official person in this field. However, because this was a collective effort by all the companions, it was not something that the caliph could sanction or could order. The companions, including Ali ibn Abi Talib, including Ubay ibn Ka'b, they had to agree, all of them, on this issue. This was a very important issue. So initially, although he put Zayd at the head of the committee, but shortly after a couple of weeks, everyone realized that Zayd is not the man for the job. And the companions insisted that Zayd should be removed and Ubay ibn Ka'b be put as the master of this master compilation. And it's very interesting, Ubay ibn Ka'b used to dictate from his own copy to other companions, and other companions either agreed or slightly disagreed, and they came to a sort of agreement about the end product. So eventually, what you are reading now as the Quran is not the compilation of Zayd ibn Thabit, is the compilation of Ubay ibn Ka'b. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
Thank you very much. So we can open up, inshallah, for some questions and comments and discussion, hopefully. I'm looking around.
I want to ask you, I do have 3 questions, I would say. Starting from differences aside than what you have concluded on, shouldn't the whole Muslim community giving some credit to Uthman as the third Caliph at least to uniform it? That's one. Number 2 is that if God has promised to protect the Quran, why it was not officially compiled in the era of Prophet, peace be upon him? And number 3, is there any official copies available from the household of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at current time? Or was there any copy at that time which was taken by Niqab in consideration during the third Caliph?
Now, regarding the first point, yes, of course, all the Muslims give credit to Uthman for that. And give credit to Uthman not because of his knowledge of doing it, but because it was an urge of the office of caliphate that no one else had the authority to do it. And it was the suggestion of the companions that we have to do this. And actually, after Hudhayfa suggested the issue to Uthman, he saw that it was not something that he, by his own official authority, could do. Therefore, he summoned other companions. And everyone consulted on the issue, and everyone agreed that this is something that should be done. So credit goes there. There's no issue about that. Our point was about Zayd's collection, not Uthman's collection, which of course are different. Now the second issue was
protection of the Quran from God.
Well,
it's been promised by the
yeah,
why it was not compiled in a book or any other form. Whatever their version is, that this used to be on the scrolls or these dates and that sort of thing. Why it was all of a sudden invited in the first Caliph era?
When God says that we do something, for example, we protect the Quran or something, he doesn't mention in what procedure, with what sort of method. At the end of the day, we see the Quran is protected anyhow. And there are 2 opinions, whether the Quran was wholly compiled at the time of the Prophet or after the time of the Prophet. Now, both Sunni and Shias have different views on this. For example, Ayatollah Khoei believes that the Quran was wholly compiled at the time of the Prophet, and if you look at his prolegomena, you would see that he has brought many arguments. Ayatollah Ma'rifat, who was a student of Ayatollah Khoei actually, disagrees with him, and he says that it was not possible to compile the whole Quran at the time of the Prophet because no one knew when the revelation was going to end. The Quran was written actually by these companions like Ubay ibn Ka'b and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, but it was not put as a book because they didn't know when the revelation is going to end, and the Prophet had not mentioned where the chapters should be. The chapters used to come, and the companions themselves later on decided. This is the view of Ayatollah Ma'rifat and Ayatollah Tabatabai in the Shi'i world, not Ayatollah Khoei, of course, who believes, I assume, that even the chapters or the order of chapters was made by the instruction of the Prophet. However, the companions actually decided to make the chapters in a sort of easier way to recite, having the longer ones at the beginning with all laws and things, and shorter ones at the end. Now, the very idea of, or the traditions that we have about the compilation of Ali ibn Abi Talib, that he compiled in the order of revelation, probably the chapters, not the verses, would tell us that there was no sort of necessity mentioned by the Prophet that the chapters should be compiled in which order. So Ali ibn Abi Talib chose to compile in the order of revelation, while other companions chose to compile in the order that we see today. Of course, there are differences between Ubay ibn Ka'b's codex and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's codex and Zayd's codex with regards to the chapters. However, what is important is that the Quran was actually put in one book for us, and there is no distortion, no deletion of what, of course, the companions knew to be the Quran. And then that was, based on our Shia view, that was sanctioned by AMI alayhimus salam as well, saying that this is the Quran that was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Let's go.
Thank you. So it seems like we're hinting that there was some sort of incentive or motivation for the Khulafa to select Zayd's codex above other codices. I mean, would we suggest that perhaps there was a substantive difference, perhaps in the ordering, or?
No, sorry, they didn't use Zayd. They didn't select Zayd codex or prefer it over others. They actually did not use it at all.
Yeah, but it seems to be trying to sideline other codices to bring him forward as the more.
No. As I said, it was not used at all. It was just stored there because they wanted an official copy or a sort of private copy for themselves. We never see in any tradition that Zayd's codex was, for example, read in any part of the Muslim world. It was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud or Ubay ibn Ka'b or Abu Musa Ash'ari or Miqdad ibn Ams. These were the codices who were in use. Zayd's codex was just stored in the Caliphate's court and then was transferred to Hafsa's house. So it was not used at all. The question is, why did they prefer Zayd to compile the Quran rather than others? That was the question.
Yeah, so my question really is, what's their motivation for whatever it is that we're suggesting? Even if it wasn't used, would we say it had no influence on the later work of Uthman at all?
Because as I said, Uthman actually asked Hafsa to give that copy to the compilers, to the committee. And they gave it to the committee. They just compared it and gave it back. However, it was Ubay ibn Ka'b who was dictating the Quran and others were writing it. And then, of course, comparing with their own memory, their own writings, and mainly what is in the Quran now, in terms of recitation and the writing and all these things, is from Ubay's codex.
Right, so would we say, but the scope that it might have influenced Ubay's existing codex, or we wouldn't even say that?
Who influenced, sorry?
So would we say that Zayd's version, could it have possibly influenced the later, the current existing?
I don't know. You see, what the tradition says that they only asked Hafsa to give them for a while so that they compare and give it back. That's all.
So what's their motivation then? So this seems like quite the way it's been described, it seems like there's been a concerted effort to try and, to do whatever it is that's been done. But where did the motivation come from? Was it to
what was the value? What was the value of having an official copy if it was never referred to?
And why select somebody who seems unsuitable? It seems like there was an agenda.
Well, that's our question, actually. That's our main question. Why they do that? And the answer I can think of is that they wanted, because a person like Ubay ibn Ka'b having a copy of the Quran, complete copy of the Quran, written by his own knowledge, and a person like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud having one, and someone like Ali ibn Abi Talib having one, and someone like Abu Musa Ash'ari with his own political opinions having one, and then Abu Bakr and Umar do not having anything, and not having an official copy, was somehow not very nice.
Social capital. Social capital? So it's a source of social capital that they had a copy of the Quran.
Of course. Of course. A social capital and, of course, credibility. And then why did they choose Zayd ibn Thabit, a 23-year-old boy, for doing that? Well, because no one else would have done it for them. And they had their own copies. Why should they come and compile another copy? And they said, okay, use our copy. But had they used their copy, it would have been Ubay's copy or Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's copy, not their own copy. This is what we can think. Of course, as I said, these are the questions that the hadith would raise for us, rather than we may not have answers for them, or we may need more investigation to find answers for it. What I just wanted to say here is that Zayd's compilation was of very little value in the eyes of companions, very little value.
Anybody else want a question or comments? Yes.
Thank you.
What about actually I wanted to ask two things, one relating to the Quran and the other one to something else that you mentioned. What about the recitations? If Ubay bin Ka'b was the one who oversaw the compilation of the Quran, did he similarly dictate the recitation of it? Because we had the whole problem with the 400 odd recitations, which were then narrowed down to 7. Did he also suggest a recitation?
Of course, he had his own recitation. However, this recitation could not have been reflected on the paper because there was no diacritical marks, no dots or something like that. So that is why the written Quran at that time had no value on its own. When Uthman made 7 copies of the Nuskhatul Imam, so to speak, sending it to 7 different parts, he had to send a reciter with each of them to recite it. Because if you just look at the Quran now and just imagine there's no diacritical marks, no dots, well, of course, you recite it in many different ways. Yarja'un, yurja'un, turja'un, tarja'un. I mean, all these could be recited from one very simple word. So the Quran, up to the time when diacritical marks were put on it by Khalil ibn Ahmad and later on developed by others, could not have been used by people without a reciter. So the reciter should have gone and teach them how to recite it. Now, these reciters themselves differed because they were not all with Ubay ibn Ka'b, or they just forgot, for example, how did Ubay ibn Ka'b recite, or how did Ali ibn Abi Talib recite, and therefore these recitations developed. And one of the major mistakes which has taken place is that the idea of 7 recitations, which was something emerging in the 4th century, was confused with the idea of 7 ahruf, which was something of traditions, and then people thought that the Quran is revealed in 7 recitations, which is not true. Now, what we recite now, Ayatollah Ma'rifat in his book, in At-Tamheed, has tried to prove that what we recite now is the recitation of Ubay ibn Ka'b. And it is the recitation which was widespread everywhere, and other recitations should have been actually a variation of this. And this is why AMI said, "Aqra'u kama yaqra'u nas," read the way people read. And that was the recitation of Ubay ibn Ka'b. Now, what we have now, what we recite now, or is in our hand in the Quran, is the recitation of Hafs ibn Sulaiman, from Asim ibn Abi Najud, from Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, from Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Ubay did not differ with Ali ibn Abi Talib, actually. And Ubay actually conveyed or taught the recitation of Ali ibn Abi Talib to Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami.
I remember that from Hadi Ma'rif's discussions, yes.
Yeah.
This is 2nd generation students of Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yeah. So what actually the Quran which is recited now is a Shi'i Quran. I mean, Shi'i recitation, because Hafs was Shia, Asim was Shia, Abu Abdurrahman was Shia, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, of course, that was the recitation of him.
The other thing that you mentioned was the law of ta'seed.
Yeah.
Where did Zayd get this law from?
Well, it was mainly, the fiqh usually at that time was made by qiyas, and saying that, for example, okay, if there is something extra, why should we give it to the female which has less, for example, share of inheritance? We give it to the male of the 2nd category or 2nd level of the heirs. Yeah, I mean, these are the things which are mainly cropped from qiyas rather than anything else.
Any other? Time for a final question or comment? Please.
I've got a question, but it is not directly relevant to your discussion. How reliable is the order of the verses in the current Quran?
The scholars have no disagreement that the order of the verses were arranged by the Prophet himself. The disagreement is only about the order of the chapters. And the fact that the Prophet, peace be on him, mentioned many surahs of the Quran, for example, whoever recites Surah Yasin, or whoever recites Surah Tawheed or Mulk, or all these things, would show that these surahs were completely compiled at the time of the Prophet in the order of the verses. Ayatollah Marifat has his own opinion about it, saying that usually when a chapter wanted to start, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim was revealed to the Prophet, and then the other verses continuously came to the Prophet, either all in one go or in different occasions. Very rare cases, probably there have been, that a verse was revealed to the Prophet which was not directly related to the chapter which was in the process of revelation, which Prophet said, you put it in that chapter. Now, we know that there were many verses that which were revealed to the Prophet, and Prophet said, put this verse in such and such chapter. But that may have been, according to Ayatollah Marifat, between a Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and end of a chapter, and then before another Bismillah ar-Rahman was revealed, a verse was revealed to the Prophet, and Prophet said, put it in such and such chapter.
As far as I remember, I said that there are two cases in which we are sure that it hasn't changed, the order. One of them is Ayatul Tathir, and the other one is Ayatul Qadir.
I'm not sure if I understood Allama Tabatabai correctly, but what I understood is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, purposely put them in those places which are irrelevant to the subject of these, to protect the Quran from variation. This is what I understand from what he said, rather than others actually changing them. What he says is that, as I remember, that had these verses not been somehow hidden in a place where there was the room for justification or different explanation, then the Umayyads would have changed it. But by doing that, putting, for example, Ayatul Tathir in a context which is talking about the wives of the Prophet has protected the ayah from being changed or removed.
So it was in the way of protecting the Quran.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a very, very interesting discussion, and hopefully those who are watching online will benefit as well. And we hope that this will be the first of many such sessions, inshallah.
Thank you so
And
much.
maybe we can thank him with a salawat, please. As usual, there's some tea and coffee and drinks and things like stuff, huh?
I like as usual. Thank you.
We have some food as well before you go.
Thank you. Welcome.